Committee on Government Operations. It is Thursday, March 31st, 2022, and we are here today for a virtual hearing on Docket 0188, an ordinance preventing wage theft in the city of Boston, referred to the committee on January 26, 2022. I sponsored this proposal along with Councilor Julia Mejia in accordance with Chapter 22 of the Acts of 2022, modifying certain requirements of the open meeting law in relieving public bodies of certain requirements, including the requirements that public bodies conduct its meetings in a public place that is open and physically accessible to the public. The City Council will be conducting this hearing virtually via Zoom and is being recorded. This enables the City Council to carry out its responsibilities while adhering to public health accommodations and ensuring public access to its deliberations through adequate alternative means. The public may watch this hearing via live stream at www.boston.gov City Council TV and on Xfinity 8, RCN 82, Verizon 964. It will also be rebroadcasted at a later date. Written comments may be sent to the committee email at ccc.go@boston.gov and will be made a part of the record and available to all councilors. Public testimony will be taken at the end of this hearing. This morning, I'm joined by my council colleagues, Councilor Julia Mejia and Councilor Kenzie Bach. We are joined by members of the administration today, Director Trin Nguyen from the Office of Workforce Development and Deputy Director Caitlin Gossett from the Office of Workforce Compliance. We are also joined by advocates and union representatives, Audrey Richardson from Greater Boston Legal Services, the Employment Law Unit, Chris Source from the National Atlantic States Regional Council of Carpenters, Darlene Lombos from the Greater Boston Labor Council, and Jamie McNeil from Unite Here Local 26. This ordinance would allow the city to leverage municipal tools in order to prevent wage theft practices in the city of Boston. It would apply to all city contractors and organizations with municipal construction contracts, building permits, and licenses. And specifically, this ordinance is seeking to hold not just contractors, but also subcontractors accountable for their employment practices. The ordinance would also create a wage theft committee in order to review wage theft complaints and provide recommendations to the mayor and city council on implementation and effectiveness of this ordinance. Finally, the ordinance would also establish a formal wage theft complaint process in coordination with Corporation Counsel and the Attorney General's office. I think that everyone at this hearing is in support of the goal of preventing wage theft, but we want to make sure that we're not overlooking any issues of the legislation and that this legislation ends up being the best version possible when passed. I'd also like to note that the committee has received a letter from the Attorney General's office, which stated that while they have no position on this ordinance, they believe that there is a role for municipalities to play in ensuring that all workers are fairly compensated. That letter was sent out to all councilors prior to this hearing and will be included as part of the record. Public record. I'd now like to kick this over to my co-sponsor, Councilor Mejia, for some opening remarks, followed by my council colleagues in order of arrival. Councilor Bach is here with us today as well. And so, Councilor Mejia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Councilor Arroyo, for sharing this hearing and for bringing us on as one of the co-sponsors. Wage theft is a real problem that our office knows well. Employees in our office have had their wages illegally garnished by previous employers with in a few places, and if any, to turn to us for resolution. And when we're talking about this ordinance, it's not like this is a faraway issue. Everyone in this Zoom knows somebody who has experienced wage theft. As the daughter of a mother who was undocumented for a period of time, I know that this issue is severe amongst the immigrant community, particularly the undocumented community. I see this as financial abuse. I look forward to this hearing, not only because this ordinance is incredibly important, but because I know that this ordinance isn't perfect yet. And we need to learn from, we need to lean into this conversation about what we need to do together to make sure that this ordinance has the desired impact that we hope it will have on the community that we're here to represent. We're all here because we have a shared vision of what the problem is. So now it's up to us to come together and work collaboratively so that we can find the right solution. And I also want to thank the Carpenters Union for working in deep partnership with our offices to get us to this point. Thank you again to the lead sponsor for your leadership in this space, both as a lawyer and as a city councilor member. You have been on the front lines on all things that deal with equity. So thank you for your leadership. And thank you everyone for being here today.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. Councilor Bach, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to you and Councilor Mejia for sponsoring this, and to the carpenters for all their work. And it's great to see so many labor leaders on the call today. I just want to say that this is so important, and I'm so glad, not just that we are talking about this, about passing an ordinance, but that frankly, we're having this conversation at all. I think if you compare how often in our society we're talking about shoplifting and petty theft, and how frankly, infrequently we're talking about the theft of people's labor, their time, which is, I think, it's a shocking thing that it's as prevalent as it is in our society, and that it's a crime that is committed by those with a lot of money against those who have very little. And so for me, it just feels like one of the main things that government can and should be doing, and like a really key role for local government when it comes to our big deep-pocketed corporate actors. And I just think that, on the, it would be great if we had stronger laws on this at the federal, state level. But even when we do have laws at those levels, it's often really at our local level that the abuses become apparent, and that we actually see things that don't look right. And we kind of notice that there are job sites that don't seem to reflect who's supposedly being employed there. And so I think, it really is at this local level that we have the opportunity to be a real ally to the worker. And I think, wage theft it's appropriately named. The reality is that if you're not being paid for your labor, it's forced unpaid labor. And that's something that's illegal according to our Constitution. So really glad to be here today, and grateful to you all for sponsoring, and to all the union leadership who are here to testify. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Bach. And I will just say some brief things really quickly. I think this is important to get passed. And what I would like to do with this sort of vehicle of this ordinance is, in partnership with the Carpenters Union and other unions, we've got very strong language here when it comes to figuring out ways in which we can hold companies and subcontractors and developers and other folks accountable for wage theft. I would like to expand that tent as much as possible so that we figure out ways in which we can make sure that people who are conducting wage theft in the hospitality industry, in the restaurant industry, what methods are available to us as a city. We have stop work orders for contractors. I'd like to have something similar for organizations that are habitual offenders of this. And I would also just say that wage theft is insidious in and of itself. But what we also know is that folks who conduct wage theft, those sorts of contractors and subcontractors, when they're doing that, they're usually also the first ones to cut corners on worker safety. They're the ones to make folks who are injured on the job pay their own expenses or not report their injuries. And so dealing with this is a priority for me. It should be a priority for the city. I believe it will be. And so I look forward to hearing from our first panel, which will be the administration, here represented by Director Trin Nguyen from the Office of Workforce Development, and Deputy Director Caitlin Gossett from the Office of Workforce Compliance, as well as Audrey Richardson from the Greater Boston Legal Services Employment Law Unit. And so to be clear, this is a hearing to sort of talk about what we could do, what we should do, why we should do this. But I'm also open to hearing concerns about language or things where folks would like to either strengthen the language or fine tune the language so that there's not unforeseen consequences, so that we can take that into the working session as well. And that's for both panels. But if at this time, I'd like to give the floor over to Trin Nguyen, Director Trin Nguyen, Director Caitlin Gossett, and Audrey Richardson from the Greater Boston Legal Services. And I just want to make sure that they're all here actually on the panelist side. One second.
While we're waiting, I just wanted to know if folks can hear me. This is Trin.
Yes, you're clear. And if you would like to, if you have an opening statement and you would like to start, you may.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Councilor, and thank you, Councilor Arroyo, Chair Committee of Government Operations and co-sponsor of this important wage theft ordinance. I also like to thank you, Councilor Mejia, Chair of the Labor and Workforce Development and Economic Development. Both of you are very good colleagues in this work, so I'm very proud to be in alliance with you. Councilor Arroyo, I used to work with your dad way back in the day. That's how old I am, my friend.
I would never guess.
And I'd like to thank all the counselors who are here as well. and the advocates, community partners, and presenters who have been doing this work for quite some time. They really are the pioneers of this work. It is a privilege to be engaged in this important effort, so I thank you for giving me and our office the opportunity to present and also to present and also to let you know of our work. I'm also joined by our staff, Kathleen Gossett, our new Deputy Director of Labor Compliance for Office of Workforce Development. As you all know, my name is Trin Nguyen. I'm the Director of OWD. I've been in this role for 8 years, and prior to this role, I had the pleasure of serving as the Chief of Staff at the Boston Housing Authority under former Mayor Menino. Just briefly, some of you know OWD, just to state that it is an innovative agency within Mayor Wu's Economic Opportunity and Inclusion Cabinet, led by Chief Shagun Iduwu, and OWD aims to ensure the full participation of all Boston residents in the city's economic vitality and future. To this end, OWD funds and oversees programs and provide Boston residents with skills training, job search assistance, education, such as adult basic education, ESOL, and post-secondary education, financial coaching for credit building, tax help, and other economic supports for low-wage workers. More information can be found on our website. And while skills training and career pathways for Boston residents is a priority for the city and for OWD, it's only one important portion of the equation on equity. To truly tackle the inequities of the labor market, we must also support quality jobs that provides family-sustaining wages and employer-sponsored benefits, career mobility, and worker protection with progressive legislation and laws. So it's not just about skills training, it's about working with employers to improve the jobs that our workers get options for. And for these reasons, even when OWD is limited in our capacity, we are prioritizing labor compliance for the city. Wage theft has been and continues to be one such effort that we prioritize. And as you may know, on October the 23rd of 2014, under Mayor Walsh, he had already signed an executive order which established disclosure and payroll certification requirements for vendors contracting businesses with the city of Boston. The purpose of this directive was to combat wage theft, the unlawful non-payment of wages in accordance with state and federal wage and hour laws. The executive order also provides that those vendors with prior violations may be required to post a wage bond in the amount equal to the sum of 1 year's gross wages for all employees. The executive order became effective on January the 1st, 2015. In recent years, as you already know, wage theft has had an incredibly increasing detrimental impact on local, state, and national economies, especially in the last 2 years during the pandemic. And while wage theft occurs across professions, the construction, hospitality, and restaurant industries have shown to be a hotbed of unscrupulous wage and hour practices by employers, and the results of wage theft investigations have been alarming. And just to note that this is not just part of my work, and like all of you, it is a personal piece for me. My parents, we came here as refugees and immigrants from Saigon, and my parents washed dishes for the last 30 to 35 years, and they loved it. But wage theft was prominent in our families as well. And it happened to me when I was a college student working in a restaurant as well. So these issues hit home to all of us, our brothers and sisters in our community as well. As you know, the Massachusetts Attorney General's Fair Labor Division brought enforcement actions against 140 employers located in Boston and garnered $1,691,000 in restitution and penalties just in 2020 and 2021 years alone. Now, that's just the documented ones that we were able to work with the AG's office, and also the AG took a leadership in. Imagine all the other millions of dollars that were not on the books, and people were afraid because they couldn't speak English, or afraid of the retaliation. So there's a lot more that's invisible that we don't know of, that's not written here. And of course, you know that the top 5 industries that involved enforcement action by the Attorney General's Fair Labor Division, both in 2020 and 2021, includes the restaurant and hotel, which came in as the top violators in that industry: services, staffing temp, constructions, retail, and sales. And like I said, while this is all on their website and at the AG's office, now what you see is what was documented. I ask that you also think about what wasn't documented. So we're hearing a lot of anecdotal, qualitative complaints in the restaurants and specifically in the construction industry. And here, enforcement from the AG's office can refer to wage theft violations like non-payment of wages and failure to pay overtime. They can also refer to similar violations such as child labor laws and failure to furnish payroll records for inspections. A report issued by the Economic Policy Institute found that this was before 2020, just 2017 and 2020, more than $3 billion in stolen wages was recovered for workers by the Federal Department of Labor and state and local enforcement agencies. And this number includes state and federal administrative action and private civil litigations as well. Now, these are stolen wages. These are not wages that people were entitled to or had privileges to. People worked to gain and deserve these wages. It was taken away from them and stolen from them. As a means of strengthening and enforcing wage theft executive order, the Mayor's Office of Workforce Development plans to continue our work with the Massachusetts Attorney General's Office and the city's licensing board and other relevant Boston commissions and boards to include additional protections for workers employed by business operating in the city of Boston. And through our posters, translated materials, and outreach, even when we had the thinnest capacity, instances of wage theft will be reported to the Office of Workforce Development and then referred to the Boston Licensing Board and other relevant commissions. And the Boston Licensing Board will determine if the complaint warrants a hearing, a warning letter, and or a warning in offender's file for future reference. A finding of the violation may be considered in the board's decision to issue, renew, or revoke a license. On behalf of OWD, I'm pleased to work with such an energized movement from the City Council and Mayor Wu's administration on this topic, one that we deeply care about. So I would be honored to listen and to learn how the city can play a more essential role in enforcing wage theft throughout the city. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to your questions and responses.
Thank you, Director Nguyen. I believe we're now going to go to Audrey Richardson from the Greater Boston Legal Services.
Good morning, and thank you for having me here. My name is Audrey Richardson. I'm the managing attorney of the Employment Law Unit at Greater Boston Legal Services. I am testifying this morning on behalf of 10 community-based immigrant worker centers that are GBLS's group clients. These are all groups that are based in Boston physically or located in Boston, or that are located in the greater Boston area, but that have members that live and or work within the city of Boston. And just to identify the groups that I'm speaking on behalf of today in alphabetical order, they are the Brazilian Women's Group, the Brazilian Worker Center, the Dominican Development Center, La Colaborativa, the Lynn Worker Center, the Massachusetts Coalition of Domestic Workers, the Massachusetts Coalition for Occupational Safety and Health, or MASCOSH, the Matahari Women Worker Center, the Metro West Worker Center, Casa de Trabajador, and the Welcome Project / Somerville Worker Center. These groups are all very appreciative and supportive of the council's interest in passing a strong City of Boston wage theft ordinance. As I'm sure you know, and as we've already heard, wage theft is a huge and unsolved problem, especially prevalent in immigrant communities and for those who work in low-wage jobs and or do not have full English proficiency. There's simply too many employers out there who don't comply with our most basic workplace protections, the minimum wage, overtime pay, or who simply engage in outright non-payment of wages. This is a problem that is important to address on as many levels and in as many ways as possible. So a city ordinance that takes a clear stance and addresses it is something that all of these groups applaud and very, very much appreciate. At the same time, the groups want to emphasize that it's very important that the ordinance focus solely on wage theft and not extend into other language that could potentially have some unintended and negative impacts on some in Boston and Boston area immigrant communities. As we all know, and has already been discussed, some folks in those communities and some of those workers that fill some of our most critical and essential jobs are undocumented, and by necessity and not by choice, work in the underground economy, as it's called. And due to the very mixed nature of immigration status in many immigrant communities, even those who do have documented status worry about their family members, friends, neighbors, and coworkers who may not. The city of Boston has taken a very clear and very much appreciated stance supporting all who live and work in our midst, even if the complete and utter failure on the federal level to achieve immigration reform has left some of our friends and neighbors in limbo and potentially vulnerable to exploitative or abusive employers. So with that in mind, the groups that I'm speaking on behalf of today are uncomfortable with a bit of the language in the proposal that goes beyond wage theft and beyond those workplace protections that are clearly provided to all Massachusetts workers under both Massachusetts and federal law, regardless of immigration status. And that language that moves into the tax and insurance related issues and the reference in the preamble to, quote, tax fraud. Including this language could potentially increase the vulnerability of some workers to abuse or retaliation when they assert their absolutely solid rights under the wage laws. The groups that I represent want to ensure that the focus of the ordinance remains on addressing the problem of employers that fail to pay wages as is required by law. It's notable that this is actually consistent with the approach that even those in the federal government have taken recently. The U.S. Department of Labor, the National Labor Relations Board, and even Secretary Mayorkas of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security have all issued strongly worded memos emphasizing that enforcing workplace rights and protecting workers who come forward from retaliation and adverse impacts, regardless of immigration status, is of the utmost importance. All of these federal agencies are actively working right now on policies and procedures to ensure that workers' rights enforcement is effective and all workers are protected, again, regardless of immigration status. There's really some relatively narrow language changes that would address these concerns. So GBLS, on behalf of the groups that we represent, and perhaps some of those groups directly may be interested in becoming involved directly as well, we're all happy to follow up to work with the council on the kind of nitty-gritty and the specific details. So again, I just very much want to thank you and emphasize our support and appreciation, and thank you for your consideration.
Thank you so much, Attorney Richardson. I'm now going to turn it over to our counselors for questions. I just want to note that we've been joined by Councilor Ruthie Louis-Jen and Councilor Brian Worrell. And so we'll go in order of arrival, starting with Councilor Julia Mejia. If you're ready, Councilor Mejia. We'll come back to you, Councilor Mejia. Let's go to Councilor Kinley Bach.
Thank you, Councilor Arroyo. Councilor Arroyo,
Sorry, can you hear me?
Oh, go ahead.
Yes. Are you ready, Councilor Mejia?
Yes.
Thank you, Councilor Bach. We'll come right back to you, Councilor.
Yeah, so sorry,
right.
I was having some technical difficulty. So I just have a few questions for the administration. Do we currently have a list of any sort of database, on the dashboard queen, of any persistent bad actors who are participating in wage theft? It would just be great to kind of have that data. And what kinds of communication do we already have with the Attorney General's office? And then, Trin, I'm curious, how do you see the Wage Theft Advisory Committee proposed in this ordinance working in collaboration with other committees and task force currently working on workforce development. I'm thinking about the Living Wage Advisory Committee in particular, but also others. So I'm just curious about, like, how do you see the collaboration around this work? And I just wanted to thank Attorney Richardson for your testimony and holding us accountable to our undocumented loved ones. I think it would be to follow your recommendations to ensure that the rights of our undocumented workers are protected. So thank you. And I'm just curious, now that we're talking, I think it's important for us to address some of the language so that we're not, so that we're removing harm. But I'm also wondering, what can we do to be more proactive in uplifting undocumented persons in this ordinance? Those are 3 questions.
So I think 2 of those questions I think were for Director Nguyen, 1 for Attorney Richardson. Is that right? So then let's start with Director Nguyen, and then we'll go to Attorney Richardson.
Great. Thank you, Councilor, and thank you, Councilor Mejia, for that question. It's a lot. So to the best of my ability, I'm going to try to be succinct as possible, and then follow up with additional materials and hearings if your schedule permits. So our office is unique in a sense that we help get the word out and help be a call center, if you may, for persistent wage theft. And so the question around legal compliance is a big one. And so our law department from the city has to get involved, and the legality of unnecessarily bureaucratic work in the city is that each legal department has a different interpretation of licensing boards and commissions. So I'll give that as a context. But the biggest player here is the AG's office. And so we are on the overall statewide labor council that meets quarterly, just to talk about general worker protection efforts and work, and bills and legislation and advocacy and collaboration. But in terms of wage theft in particular, we meet with the AG's office once a month so that we can go down the list of these potential bad actors or persistent actors. The AG, and we can follow up with you, have a very, very good and organized public database in which you can do searches and also do queries on violations, potential violations, and variety. So all that information is public. Our staff access that database, and we have links to them. We can follow up offline as well. And then during our monthly meeting with the AG's office, we just go down some of the issues, walk through some of the prominent wage theft violations and concerns. Now, because we don't have the capacity to go through all of them, what we do is prioritize some of the worst actors per se, or some that are persistent. And then, so that process was before mayoral transitions. We had a lag for a year and a half. We're back on track with the AG's office. We're meeting once a month to go through those agenda items. And then for the city's perspective, once we get those bad actors, again, there are we don't have the capacity to address all of them, but the 2 areas that we have to be strategic in that we've seen more prominent wage theft is in construction and in hospitality and restaurants. And the 2 areas that we thought about in terms of leverage of compliance are the licensing boards and commissions. And for the construction is the ZBA board, which we haven't been able to tap into for a variety of bureaucratic reasons. And because within construction, we know that developers want to and need to pull their occupancy permit so that they can operate. And if there's a violation then the zoning board then can call a hearing to see how that was reconciled. And so I think those are the levers for the hospitality and restaurant, the liquor license, which we thought was very strategic in the leverage, was the other point that we can have hearings on. However, I think there are questions around the legal compliance that we need to dig deeper, and whether or not the administration can do more on our end. It's something that we're open to listen and to learn. But those are the two commissions and departments that we work with or want to work closely with to do more on wage theft. Last, I do want to say is that every time when we have ordinances and policies, they're great. But at the end of the day, we need to operationalize it, because if we don't, we are not using the full potential of the policies or ordinances that we really push for. And so having resources and financial resources to build out that compliance unit is really important. And we're really stretched thin at this point, but I think that we need to really think about a consistent, strong compliance infrastructure that's backed by financial resources to do the work that we have to do. And I'm sure that I have additional follow-up questions, which I can do offline as well.
Yeah, no, I just wanted, before we go to the next answer, just wanted to just thank you for that intentionality, because you are absolutely right. We have a lot of ordinances and systems, protocols, and procedures in place. But I think what I have noticed in the last 28 months that I've been in office is that we don't have the infrastructure to really set and implement, and then also evaluate, right? I think that a lot of things sound good in theory, but then when you go into practice, there's an opportunity for us to learn what's working and what's not, and then how we might amend things so that we can get to what we're trying to do here, right? So I do agree with you that we need to do a better job in terms of building the infrastructure for implementation, and then accountability and reflection, because I think all of this is a work in progress, and we need to be able to come to terms with some of the tweaks that we need to make along the way. So I do appreciate that. Thank you for that. Attorney Richardson.
Yes, I guess there's three things I would say in response to your question. The first is basically, which was what I was focusing on in my original testimony, was just to make sure that that there's the do no harm component of it, and just to make sure that there's no unintended or inadvertent consequences in terms of providing tools that employers could potentially use to retaliate or to otherwise evade the consequences of their noncompliance with the law around wage theft. So that's number one. Number two, in terms of more proactive pieces, so I think just making sure that there's opportunities for other voices to be heard, and making sure that presumably through the advisory committee, that it's structured and inclusive, so as to make sure that immigrant groups' perspectives and voices are being heard in the conversations. Right now, it's a very small committee. There's obviously disadvantages to a committee like that getting very large and unwieldy, but there's probably ways to do it both through the formal structure of the advisory committee itself and otherwise. And then the third piece I would say, which really goes beyond, I think what we've already been talking about here, but is very much a very active conversation on the federal level, and presents a real opportunity, is to be looking at ways that the city can be providing and supporting affirmative relief for workers who come forward who do not have work authorization or are in work, documented status. There's already all the mechanisms with the U and T visa certification processes. The U visa being a visa that's available to victims of crime. It was originally used predominantly in the domestic violence context, but has really been used quite a lot and is really being fleshed out to be used in the context of labor-related crimes. And certainly some places in the city, like the Boston Police Department, already provides certification for, the kinds of crimes that are within its purview. But there is really an opportunity for labor-related agencies, as the AG's office on the state level and the U.S. Department of Labor on the federal level have done, to provide these certifications that will allow workers to file petitions to get visas and green cards, et cetera, down the road. So there's that. But also what's happening is that there are very active conversations on the federal level about what even more labor-related agencies and governments can do to really support workers who come forward and to affirmatively protect them. And so that was the thrust of the memo that Secretary Mayorkas put out to the other labor-related agencies to put forward proposals for how the Department of Homeland Security and the labor agencies can really affirmatively protect workers and support workplace rights enforcement. And so there are opportunities to provide support for things like deferred action that would provide much prompter work authorization and relief than things like the U and T visa can provide. I didn't mention the T is actually for victims of trafficking, and that includes labor-related trafficking as well as things like sex trafficking. So this is all very much an active conversation and project to really put the procedures and policies in place with the federal agencies, as I said, but there are already opportunities just to do it on a case-by-case basis. And I definitely think and hope that it's something that the city could be looking at in terms of expanding what it could do in the labor enforcement realm.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Arroyo.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. Councilor Bach, the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think most of my questions I'm probably going to reserve for the working session because I think we're not really doing technical language stuff today. I think just the one thing that I wanted to flag, and Trin, I don't know if you have any comments on this or if you don't, but it seems to me like there's probably two places where we could really up the city's game here. I mean, one of them definitely is, just how we use the existing infrastructure, how we escalate things with agencies more, like what can we do to penalize folks, who are getting privileges from us as a city, right? But another thing that's come up in some other spaces is, even where the law might not have as firm of a reach as we want, I would love to think about how, frankly, in the city of Boston, we shame folks who have committed wage theft. Because I think that it's sort of unconscionable that we can sometimes have actors in the city who sort of can go around running their businesses and they actually have sustained complaints of wage theft on file against them, and it's somehow not in our general conversation. So just one thing I wanted to flag for this is that even in the places where we find that we might not be able to do city enforcement in a way that shuts somebody down, I think that finding opportunities to make it really clear that the city, if the city figures out that you've done something like this, that we're really putting a scarlet letter on your business, I think is an important piece. And I think sometimes when I get frustrated about our hard power at a municipal level, I remember that there is that kind of quite substantial soft power that we can have in areas like this. So that was just one thing, Mr. Chair, I was thinking about as I was listening to kind of the constraints on us versus the state and federal actors. And I just wanted to flag.
Thank you, Councilor Bach. So are you basically saving whatever questions you have for the working session when we get into the language?
Yeah. I think it's, I think it's, I feel like we're not really doing that today, so I won't take us there.
Yeah,
but
no, we will certainly be doing that in the working session for certain. And so thank you, Councilor Bach. I know Councilor Louis Jen may have stepped away briefly. If you're there, the floor is yours. Otherwise, Councilor Worrell. Councilor Worrell, if you're able to take any, give any, ask any questions at this time, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And most of my questions have been asked. And I'll reserve my rest of my questions also for the working sessions around the language. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Worrell. And Councilor Louis Jen, when you want to ask questions, just turn your video on and I'll shoot it to you. I'll ask my questions now. Some of them have been asked already. But my first question is for Director Nguyen. What requirements or obligations currently exist for contractors with the City of Boston when they win a bid?
We had, 3 or 4 years ago, we had drafted a very thoughtful form on certifying payrolls in a variety of forms and list information for the licensing liquor department. And it was called an M16 form, and we can send that to you an example. And so it was very well thought out by lawyers and our advocates who are here, GBLS at that time, Community Labor United, and a variety of folks. And this M16 form had very intentional information about or leading to or alluding to any wage theft violation. And then over the years, we found that, the feedback was that the form was laborious and that it was already clunky to a very arduous application process. And so, previous staff took the form out and didn't maybe communicate with us on, okay, if that didn't work, what would? And so I think we were left in that limbo. That was one tool in which we used. The other piece is, again, our biggest ally is the AG's office. And so when they give us a list of really bad actors, and then we send it over to, at that time, before the liquor license commissioner and commission to say, hey, some of these were the bad actors. We need to do at least a hearing for these potential vendors. And that will help deter or send the message out. And those hearings first were sporadic, but then over time it became laborious for some of the staff members. And so it was very difficult for us to keep making calls and not getting any return phone calls, and then paperwork got shuffled. And then it just fell on the wayside. And I think we need to do, meaning the city needs to do a better job at pulling in departments that really have anchors. So for example, the law department needs to make it a priority and state that. And then some of the agencies in which we need to work on and with in partnership has to trickle down, and that training and procedures and culture have to change so that people don't think it's laborious, that the city does not want to do business with bad actors. It's not a good business model, period. And so I think when that training and method and culture shift happens, new and current staff members have to abide by that. And so we haven't done a really good job with really getting everybody on board to do that. Again, the other leverage for the administration, in my personal opinion, is getting the vendors and the bad actors to get them where it hurts most, which is in the financial pockets. And the ZBA board would be a very good lever for that, because developers who are bad actors, who have subcontractors, need their occupancy permit so that they're losing money if they don't have that. And if there are violations, you need to answer to that before we give it to you. And we approached back then the commissioner, their law department. Some of them said it was a good idea, some of them didn't. But again, it fell to the wayside because other issues took precedent and priority. And so that was the only tool we have, was the M16 form. And also, I would also consider processes within various agencies could be very useful if we really wanted to do it the right way. I hope that's a long-winded answer to your question, Counselor. I hope it answers it.
It does. Thank you. And so then I have a sort of a second question, which is, under what conditions does the city currently issue stop work orders or stop contracts? Or suspend contracts?
We had asked those same questions, and the response we got was that we don't really have legal teeth to do this. And I have to say that I question that, because it hasn't been fully vetted in which what can we do legally and what can't we do. I mean, I think so once that directive comes down to me, I'm not sure if I have that political capital to move that down the chain, to move that up the chain. So that is a question that needs to be vetted in perhaps a working session, to say, what are the compliance and tools in which we can use to hold people accountable. And so I've just listed 2 levers. That is an example. And so if let's say the ZBA denies or asks that contractor to reconcile that wage theft, I mean, I think there's a procedure that we need to figure out, and then also what we can or cannot do. But I think that's a good question. I don't have an answer to that, but I think that the law department and various legal entities of agencies need to answer to that. And I don't necessarily buy the fact that we can't pull permits and not renew it. That has been the answer given to me, and I question that. I'm not saying it's wrong or right, but until that process has been fully vetted out, I'm not wedded to that answer. The answer to your question, Counselor, is that we haven't done the homework to answer that question. That's my personal opinion.
Thank you. That's actually very helpful. That's essentially the feeling that I had as well, in the sense that I had it as well, about one, that we haven't done things, but also that we likely probably can. Sorry, my voice keeps going on. My throat has been a problem all week. So just a quick question for you, which is, what kind of resources or how much do you think you would need in terms of resources to enforce this ordinance effectively through the Office of Workforce Development, if and when, which I expect we will, we pass this?
Yeah, so I was thinking about that, and I know the Wu administration is very keen, and perhaps will make this a priority as well, is that not just to tackle wage theft, but a labor compliance unit. And so our staff have been researching across the country to see what are models. Like, I know San Francisco has a really good model. Portland, Oregon has a good model. Austin has a good model. Seattle has an office of equity underneath the mayor that does just labor compliance and procurement and sanctions. And so, thinking this broadly is that, a city's labor compliance unit, and that could start with conservatively $500,000 a year to start and to pilot. And then if we needed additional resources, we could answer back to the council and the administration on what else is needed. And so that labor compliance department, for efficiency's sake, could also handle not just wage theft, but living wage, for example. So you share that back end for efficiency. And also prevailing wage is another one. And then the other piece is equitable procurement is another one that we can put under that rubric, perhaps with sharing it with another administration office. So I think to start, conservatively, $500,000 with staff, database, some consultant to do some research, and then build out this labor compliance unit step by step and include wage theft as part of it. Now, I think that is only one piece to the equation. The biggest piece is going to be political capital. Is there a political will to say we will not do business with people and employers and vendors who don't do good to our community? And I think that has to be a political will. And then that trickles down to the cabinet members, department heads, and then we have to roll up our sleeves. For years, we have to build a culture of accountability and of values. We work for the public, and we want to make sure whatever we do on a day-to-day basis speaks to those values. And so having a compliance unit is only one piece, and a budget is only one piece, but changing the culture as we move forward is going to be huge, because I can't do 100 other things that other staff members are doing at other procurement and legal departments. I need their buy-in to call me so that we can work as a team with the AG's office. Now, the AG's office has been doing this work for quite some time, so we didn't want to reinvent databases and legal compliance infrastructure, but they can also help. The other entity that can help us with thinking about this is the Harvard Workers Law Center, the Workers Center. We have been meeting with them on a monthly basis with all compliance leaders around the country to talk about these nuts and bolts. What forms, what tools work. They're actually going to publish a toolkit and a paper on how municipalities can enforce better labor compliance units. And so they're going to lay that out across the country. But that's just to start. I hope that answers your question, Councilor.
No, and I do appreciate just how much depth you give us, Director Nguyen. So I do appreciate that in the answers. And that does answer my question. I think there's going to be, obviously, resources we're going to have to dedicate in this budget to this kind of work. But I think it's worth it and something we have to do. I do have one question for Attorney Richardson, if you're able to take it. Just in terms of the language, and I know that language is something that we're going to go over in the working sessions, and there'll be, that's where we present what the issues are. But is there any one thing in here that you think we can address to address sort of the fears around undocumented immigrants really getting hit hard in a way that we're not intending to do?
Yeah, well, thank you. I think the nitty gritty of the language is, I was assuming this was not the right time and place to get into the weeds on that, but I think there is there's language in the outside of the preamble that feels problematic to the immigrant groups, and then there are a few points in the body of the ordinance where there's various types of issues listed that really do go beyond wage theft into kind of the predominantly tax related issues, and potentially some of the kind of insurance related issues as well. So I think it's relatively, in terms of the do no harm piece of it, I think it's a relatively finite universe of spots within the ordinance that there are some specific changes that could be made. That's
fantastic. So we'll go through that more in depth during the working sessions for certain, because that's where the language gets hammered out, and we have sort of those legal conversations about what are the impacts of this, what are the collateral consequences of that. Right. And so thank you for flagging that. And I just want to make sure I had some sense of what we were talking about specifically there. I think with that, we are done with questions for this panel. And so I thank you both for your time. Oh, nope, looks like Rusi is there to ask questions. So let me go to Councilor Louis Jen so that she can ask whatever questions she has. I see she's on the move. So Councilor Louis, the floor is yours.
I'm so sorry. There's something that came up, but I've been listening, and I especially to the beginning part of the working session, to this hearing. The only thing that I have, and it's a lot of it, is like I'm looking forward to working sessions where we'll hammer out some of the language to make sure that we address any concerns that may exist around tax fraud. But it's very important that we are doing everything we can to prevent wage theft. One thing, are there lessons? Does anyone know, are there lessons from other cities that have passed similar ordinances about how the language has potentially affected, workers, maybe immigrant workers in an unintended way? Because I'd be curious to know more about that. Apologies if someone already asked this question.
I don't think anybody has. I'm not sure. This might be a good one for the next panel, unless Attorney Richardson or Director Nguyen are aware of the ones that have already been implemented. I know the next panel has folks who are very aware of the ones that have been implemented.
I guess I would just say that there's, certainly kind of the potential retaliation and adverse impacts when employers kind of misuse some of the, fine tools basically and excuses for doing things that actually are counterproductive in terms of enforcement, in terms of making workers feel vulnerable, in terms of terminating them, in terms of kind of putting additional pressures and requirements on them. All of a sudden, those there are many examples from that all the client groups that I am speaking on behalf of have seen in many different places. I mean, obviously, some of the specifics are there. The specifics vary, but there's no doubt that folks have seen real concrete examples of workers who have suffered because of the ways in which already bad acting employers have then kind of misused language to kind of put additional pressure and create additional fears for workers, whether it's through threats or through explicit actions. So I know that's a very general answer to your question, but we certainly, there are specific examples certainly that we can provide. And then, in terms of the actual language, happy to keep working on it, talking to folks.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Audrey. I appreciate your work and the work of GBLS on this issue. And yeah, I'll also, ask this question for the next panel, and, hopefully we'll have, if there are those issues, we can address them in the working session. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Lee. And so we'll go to the next panel now. I want to thank our first panel. If you want to stick around, you may. If you have something else to do, you can do that. I also want to just say, Director Nguyen, I'm very grateful for your participation today. Usually we do not get these sort of in-depth answers from the administration, so that was very welcome, and I'm very appreciative. So thank you for being here and for speaking truthfully and openly about all of the ways in which we can make something better, what we're doing now and what we can be doing. And so thank you for that. And so with that, I'm going to go to the second panel, starting with Chris Soros. And if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly, please do correct me when you introduce yourself, because I want names to be correct. From the North Atlantic States Regional Council of Carpenters, also an attorney. Darlene Lumbos from the Greater Boston Labor Council, and Jamie McNeil from Unite Here Local 26. And so we don't have any specific order here planned for how you present, but we can start with Christopher. Is it Soros or Soros?
It's Soros, yes.
Soros.
That's fine. I've heard worse attempts. I'm Christopher Soros. I'm an attorney with Craco, Soros and Landry law firm in Boston, and I've been asked by the North Atlantic States Regional Council of Carpenters to say a few words in support of the ordinance. We've heard, I don't think we need to educate anybody here about wage theft. Most of the people on this call are pretty familiar with how it impacts workers. And I'd like to address some of the discussion that's come up before me, because I think it's significant to note that wage theft often, if not usually, goes hand in hand with employers who engage in payroll tax fraud and workers' comp insurance fraud. And workers' comp insurance fraud, of course, has severe consequences for workers who are not covered by workers' compensation when they get injured. And of course, in the construction industry, some of those injuries can be serious, if not fatal. But the payroll tax fraud part of it, which, as I said, usually goes hand in hand with wage theft, deprives governments, including cities and towns, of much needed revenue. And I would just note that the Carpenters Union has devoted quite a lot of resources and has spent quite a lot of energy helping victims of wage theft, many of whom, if not most of whom, are undocumented workers. There's no interest on the part of the carpenters to do something that has some significant negative impact on undocumented workers. And we look forward to working with GBLS and CLU and their constituencies closely in the working session to get a better sense of what their issues are, and work towards coming to something that meets all of our needs. I think we've heard that a little bit about the scope of the problem, but the scope has become really such an issue that now we're turning towards municipalities to deal with the problem. And that's because particularly in some industries like the construction industry, it's really an epidemic in the construction industry. And the Attorney General's office has freely acknowledged that they don't have the resources to address the problem, as something that was noted earlier. They deal with the tip of the iceberg. And they, on numerous occasions, including, as I hear in this case, welcome the efforts of municipalities to deal with the problem through proposals like the ones that are being considered here. They've been adopted in a number of other cities in various forms, in Springfield, in Lynn, in Somerville, and I'd like to address just a few of the construction-related provisions in the ordinance just for a moment. The bill has a few dealing specifically with construction, and it's not to diminish the significance of wage theft in other sectors, because it's certainly rampant in many sectors of the economy, but it's also a very serious problem in construction. And the sections 7, 8, and 9 are designed to address construction situations specifically, and they're really designed to give the city tools that they don't really have at the moment, and in sort of novel ways, I think, to address the problem. Section 7 and 9 deal with projects that are funded by tax relief granted by the city, and address larger private construction projects that are being built pursuant to building permits. And we've had some discussion about earlier from Director Nguyen about building permits, and this provision does attempt to address that question in terms of the city's authority. The point of these two sections is not, and I like to emphasize this, it's really not to give the city tools to actually take enforcement action against the bad actors. They have a very different intent, and the idea behind them is to incentivize the parties in the kind of construction arena that really have the authority and the power to control what happens on construction sites. And I'm really talking about project owners and general contractors. The problems are really for the most part, undertaken by subcontractors or subcontractors down the chain. But the reality, unfortunately, is the illegal savings from these practices are so great that they create significant financial incentives to cheat and financial incentives on the part of owners and general contractors to turn a blind eye to what really pretty much everybody in the industry now knows is going on. And the prospect of the forfeiture of tax relief and the prospect of having a major construction site shut down in its entirety in the event wage theft is found taking place are designed to create some counter incentives to the incentive to cheat and to hopefully motivate the entities that have the authority to do something and control their job sites to keep the bad actors off their job sites. Section 8 addresses construction undertaken by the city itself when it builds, municipal offices or police departments or fire departments, that kind of thing, and is designed to, I think, basically codify elements that some of which we've seen in the mayor's executive order from a number of years ago, Mayor Walsh's executive order that was referenced a few minutes ago. We also have a few ideas about how to make it even stronger, and one in particular is a requirement that that contractors on city-funded projects have registered apprenticeship programs, registered with the state of Massachusetts. The cities of Portland and Providence have similar requirements for municipal contracts, and they accomplish a number of significant purposes, and one of which is that they keep workers who are receiving quality skills training in the pipeline, so that it can help assure the availability of a skilled workforce to meet the city's own construction needs in the future. But particularly in the city of Boston, with its strong resident jobs policy, an apprenticeship requirement goes a long way to provide young residents of the city with career pathways into really good paying jobs in the construction industry. And with that, I don't think there's much need to go into at this stage into the nitty gritty, but we look forward to working with city councilors, with GBLS, their constituent worker centers, and anybody else who has an interest in this to come up with something that works for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I'm going to go to Darlene Lumbos from the Greater Boston Labor Council.
Great. Thank you so much for having me this morning. My name is Darlene Lumbos. I'm the Executive Secretary Treasurer of the Greater Boston Labor Council. We represent 100,000 working union members and their families throughout this region. And I just want to thank you, Councilor Arroyo and Councilor Mejia, for your leadership on this issue and allowing me to share my testimony today. I'm so glad that Trin is here as well. She's just done an incredible job at operationalizing that executive order, as was mentioned before, that former Mayor Walsh signed in 2014. And as you heard, she's just a wealth of knowledge and expertise in this area. And it's that she is my go-to person when we have some questions about any of this stuff. I mean, I can hardly believe that it was 9 years ago, back when I was executive director of CLU, that we started this campaign. It was a statewide campaign to bring together unions and worker centers to address this crisis that we're in. Actually, as Chris said, it's an epidemic. I mean, even back then, we already know construction industry that wage theft is rampant. But back then, we were just seeing it across industries. It was even more prevalent in property services and hospitality and the restaurant industry. And it was because employers were using this, as you all already know, this business model where they were creating layers and layers of contractors and subcontractors that created a lack of accountability for those businesses who had this model. Were basically gaming the system, and were no longer could be accountable to whoever the employee was because of these layers of contractors and subcontractors. And, it's called the underground economy, the fissured economy, all those things. You all already know that. But at the end of the day, it's this basic thing that workers are being cheated out of an honest day's pay for an honest day's work. That's the basic concept here. And we're all made to pay that price. Taxpayers, the communities we live in, even responsible businesses, they can't compete because of the way irresponsible companies are gaming the system. And it is all about maximizing profits on the backs of workers. So part of the statewide campaign to prevent wage theft was this strategy, as Trin mentioned, to pass ordinances and executive orders, because we know that both the state and cities need tools to deal with this epidemic. And there have been several cities that have passed wage theft ordinances and executive orders. And we're so thrilled that we are now codifying and even making better what Trin has been able to do with the executive order. It's been a long time coming, and we're very excited to be working with you all on this. I am happy to report that Massachusetts bill has been reported out of committee, so we might be able to finally see that bill pass. We're really excited about that, but that doesn't preclude or stop us from needing to pass these in cities as well. As Chris mentioned, the state bill is not the fix for wage theft, nor will this ordinance. In fact, there are other tools we need to deploy. And Trin mentioned some of them. There are other things like wage liens and deputizing more compliance officers and things like that. But this ordinance is an incredible first step, builds upon the executive order, and we're just really excited to be working with you on making this the gold standard from here on out. So I'll leave it at that. And thank you so much for having me this morning.
Thank you so much for being here and for the work that you do. And Jamie McNeil here from Local 26, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Councilor, and thank you, Councilor Mejia, as well. It's a real honor to be here. My name is Jamie McNeil. I'm the general agent for the Hotel Food Workers Union, Local 26. We represent about 12,000 workers at the airport, in the hotels, at the convention centers, at the casino, at Fenway Park. We're the Hotel and Food Workers Union. And I just want to echo a lot of what Darlene said. It's so great to be here with Trin as well. Trin, you're a gift to the city. I'm saying that in full. I hope you hear it in my voice. You're a real gift to the city. You're a real gift to the labor movement here in the city and throughout the Commonwealth. And it's the work you do behind the scenes that no one sees, no one knows about, that has such an impact on so many workers' lives here in Boston. So I want to give a special shout out to you. You're a gift to so many, and I thank you for all the work that you do. We have a saying here. I'll be very brief. We have a saying here in Boston that whether you're pouring concrete or you're pouring coffee, you deserve respect and dignity, and you deserve to get paid what you're worth. The reason Local 26 supports this ordinance is that it takes huge steps in codifying that concept and that ideal that we have here in the city of Boston. And what do I mean by that? The executive order that Mayor Walsh put forward and that Trin has been reinforcing for years really laid that ideal that we have here out on the table. This ordinance codifies it, it expands it, it strengthens it. And the great thing about that executive order in this ordinance is that it really treats people who pour concrete and pour coffee on an equal level, because we all know that wage theft exists in those industries and is most prevalent in those two industries. Just a little experience from my from my perspective. The good news is, for us, we deal in union shops. We do not really deal with wage theft. I mean, like most things, I'm a kind of a broken record. Whether it's affordable housing, whether it's crime, there's so many things that I have firsthand seen that unions fix, right? This is another one. If an employer knows that there is somebody monitoring payroll, that there is a outlet for that worker to go to that can remedy the situation within hours, then the problem doesn't exist, right? And so I'm not saying it doesn't exist 100%. I certainly, was dealing with spreadsheets last week, trying to get to the bottom of a case. But when there's somebody monitoring day to day a workplace, you don't deal with this situation as much. Bad news is for the non-union sector, right? We're organizing a bunch of restaurants in the airport. We're organizing, we have a bunch of other restaurants, but it's very prevalent in the restaurant industry. It's very prevalent in the hotel industry that's non-union, especially when you get outside of Boston. We also see it prevalent with subcontracting in the non-union hotel industry. Subcontracting is becoming more and more prevalent and more classifications in departments in hotels. We all saw with the Hyatt hotels, back in 2009 when they outsourced the housekeeping department. That continues on today with a lot of non-union properties. And so this ordinance will go a long way to remedying a lot of those situations here in the city of Boston. I just want to go back to, enforcement, right? Policies are only as good as the enforcement mechanism. The great thing, going back to whether you pour concrete or whether you pour coffee, is this allows for an essential stop work order if the problem isn't resolved in restaurants and in hotels. And so just like a construction site, as many have said on this call, right? If there's a recalcitrant employer and they are refusing to remedy the situation in a timely manner, right, the licensing board can't step in. And that's a huge, as Councilor Mejia pointed out, that's a huge way to get a problem solved, right? And so that's a huge part of this. If there's other ways to strengthen it, we'd be happy to look at that. But that is, like I said, policy is only good as enforcement, and I think that's a great tool here. So again, want to thank you, Councilor Arroyo, Councilor Mejia, all the councilors on the call, and my other panelists and Trin. We're in full support, and yeah, looking forward to the working session. And thank you for all you do for the city of Boston. This is only going to create more equity in a number of industries that really, really need it today. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all, frankly, for your testimony today. I'm going to kick it over to the councilors again, beginning with Councilor Mejia.
Yes, thank you, Councilor Arroyo. And it's always great to be.
The floor is yours.
Thank you, Councilor Arroyo. I always like to say it's good to be with family, right? I think we're all here working towards the same goal, and I'm so encouraged by the level of intentionality that each of you have brought to this conversation. And so I just have a few questions, and I want to ask the same questions to our second panel as we did to the first. Is what recommendations do you have for us to make sure that we're being intentional about supporting undocumented workers? And something new about this ordinance is that we're moving away from traditional fining structures for contractors that don't meet our requirements, going as far as revoking their contract. What are your thoughts on this? And can you expand on what impact you think this would make?
Is that for the panel as a whole, Councilman Mejia?
Yeah, whoever wants, it's just for the advocate. So whoever wants to dive in.
It looked like Counselor. Look, I gave you a job with us. It looks like Darlene Lambos is on duty.
It's quite a promotion.
So on the, for me, and I think for those of us in the labor movement and in the social justice movement, it is the way we protect workers and undocumented workers is for them to also be a part of the solution. And so I do think it is important for us to obviously go back and talk to workers about what language they want to see. I don't think that it's something that we should just do that without consulting workers themselves. So we will do that. And we are already in conversation. I mean, I know that Audrey is speaking for all of the worker centers that she represents. We obviously, when at Community Labor United, brought together worker centers and unions to have those conversations. That's why we ended up with a really strong statewide bill. And yes, those conversations are hard and also awesome, because then everybody's on the same page that we need comprehensive immigration reform, and it's great. And we'll fight together for that too. But in the meantime, we also have other things we need to be doing, and how to get language that everybody feels good about is our job. It's what we need to do. On the impact, I think that, Trent had mentioned some of the things that just in the last been able to operationalize, and some of the impact of just even the executive order, how contracts can be shifted or licenses not renewed, or all those things, I think are huge impacts. I think that it's so important that employers know what kind of values that the city has, and we value the dignity and the honest days paid for an honest day's work, kind of just basic concepts of rights and dignity for workers. That is so important to have that signaled by the city, by all of you, by the leadership, by having a clarity around who can do business in this town. And so that's very, very important. And the impact is even broader than just this wage theft issue.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think we look forward to discussions with with all the affected parties. But I think just conceptually, in the past, the effort has been focused on finding the violators and bringing enforcement action against the violators, and that's proven to be just. The problem is so massive now that there just aren't the resources to do that. So I think an important way to advance these interests is to use the city's ability to create incentives and disincentives on the people who really make the decisions and have control over things, and it can do that by some couple of the ways that are in this ordinance, like the forfeiture of tax relief, shutting down a stop work order on a construction project, but also, like has been discussed earlier, withholding, revoking permits, licenses, procurement priorities, all those things, aren't designed to address actual violations. They're designed to motivate and incentivize the people who might be thinking about engaging in it or turning a blind eye to it with their contractors or subcontractors, to keep the bad actors either off their projects or off their contracts, or to keep them in line. I think that's an important way to maybe think about leveraging the city's kind of resources to motivate compliance.
Yeah, and just one more thing, Councilor Arroyo, and then I'll wrap up with my questions. Just it's more of a comment, not so much a question, but in a lot of work sites, there's know your rights, and this we don't discriminate. There's always all of this signage that is put up. And I think that in terms of when I think about implementation and I think about making sure that people understand what their rights are, there should be something that we can ensure that all of these work sites have some clear language and visible signage that for the employees to read and see, so that, you know, on the implementation end, to Trin's point, that there should be a level of accountability where information is shared and disseminated to the workforce, because otherwise you don't know what you don't know. And I think that there is an opportunity for us to also have that level of intentionality on the implementation and to have some language that is visible in different work sites, that if you are, if you suspect that, you know, you're being a victim of wage theft, here's the phone number that you can call. And I'm not sure if that already exists, and if it does, great. If it doesn't, then I think we have an opportunity to talk about that level of communication, and also through the city in terms of PSAs and getting information out to the general public. That's something else that I think could potentially help.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. Councilor Bach, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Councilor Arroyo. I don't think I really have questions. These are some of my favorite people, and I'm so grateful. Darlene, Jamie, Chris, it's wonderful to make your acquaintance. Yeah, really want to thank you all, and just say that I think that, you know, I just feel as though we're not, like, at the national level, like, we're not winning the battle in terms of like labor and rights in this country. And so when we talk about Boston being a union city, like, we have to be that model par excellence. Like, we have to figure out how we can like wield every possible tool to kind of push back against the tide, and say, hey, the whole city, not just inside of our labor unions, but in City Hall, stands for workers' rights and against wage theft. And so, yeah, just count me in for whatever we can do. And very much agreeing with Trin. I raised my hand earlier, Mr. Chair, only to agree forcefully that, like, I don't think we should be stopping at any invisible stop signs. Like, you know, if there's something that the city can be doing with our regulatory regime to say, hey, you're a bad actor, we're not going to do business with you, I don't think that we should just be, without like an actual legal chapter and verse, shying away from doing that. Whatever levers we can pull, we should be pulling. So I'm very much here for it along the way. And thanks so much to the labor panel.
Thank you, Councilor Bach. Councilor Louis Jen, and I just want to note we've been joined by the President of the City Council, Ed Flynn, and he will be following Councilor Louis Jen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and sorry that I was walking before. I am now fully settled. I want to thank this really great panel of experts on the issues of workers' rights and wanting to make sure that we get this right. And so I'm going to ask the same question that I asked previously. And I think it's more concerned with like how much of a, and we'll get into this, how much of a fine tooth comb on language do we need to use here? If anybody knows about these ordinances being enacted in other cities and how if at all, any of the language in a wage theft ordinance has been actually harmful to our immigrant workers. I'd be curious to know if anyone knows about that, so that we can sort of know what pitfalls to watch out for as we move forward.
As far as I know, Counselor, there has not, these are, the ordinances were model language, so they've been trying to be successively better and stronger. So we started with kind of the basics with an executive order here in Boston, and then Cambridge did an executive order, then Chelsea did the actual first ordinance, and there's one in Quinn. I mean, so each one of them are slightly different, but they all use the same stock kind of concepts and language. The one in Somerville is actually the strongest, and the thing I think is that added some of this language. I think that the carpenters added around specifically tips and some other pieces. And so there has been, in fact, I'm inviting Trin to go over to Somerville to try to help them do some implementation, because the experiences that Boston has had is actually around operationalizing, whether it was an ordinance or executive order. It's actually Boston has done the best job across the board. So Trin is being invited, or I am making her come to some of these meetings so that she can share how each city can actually operationalize these executive orders and ordinances. I don't know if that answered your question, but so no, my experience, my understanding is there has been no adverse effect based on our wage theft ordinances on immigrant workers.
And if I may, we worked pretty closely with GBLS, Brian Flynn at GBLS on the Somerville ordinance. But I think Darlene's point is an important one. It's one thing to have these ordinances on the books, and it's another thing to actually implement them and operationalize them, as Darlene said. And in that respect, again, I think it's worth keeping in mind that these are tools designed to give the city tools to do things. And to the extent they give the city tools, the city does have, some discretion in how it operationalizes these things and enforces them. I think there's got to be some room for operationalizing them in ways that don't unintentionally affect people that we were really not intending to harm. But these are things, we're going to have to sit down and, talk together and work out, privately and in a working group. And, I'm sure we can make some progress.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Louis-Jen. Do you have any further questions?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you again to our panelists for being here and for all you do. Thank you.
Thank you. Council President Flynn, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and apologize for being late at a prior engagement, but I'll certainly review the video. But just want to say thank you to the panelists for the important work they're doing on this issue. Wage theft is a serious and significant problem in our state and country. Anyone that engages in wage theft of workers, exploiting workers, should really have no part working in the city of Boston, especially. This is a city that stands up for workers and worker rights. And for someone to come in here and not pay their workers a decent wage, not give the workers their fair share, their fair wage, withhold it, they should not be welcomed back here on any project, regardless of how big it is or how small it is. That's how serious this issue is. It's exploiting people. It's exploiting people in need, especially. It's exploiting immigrants. Boston has a long and proud history of standing up for workers' rights, but also for immigrant rights too. And when we steal 5 cents off anybody, that's really showing a terrible example for anyone else to follow, that even though it might be 5 cents, we'll overlook that. And we shouldn't overlook anything in this city when it comes to wage theft. So I have a lot of development that takes place in my district. And if I found out that some company was exploiting workers, I'd demand an investigation immediately about it. And I wouldn't want to see that company working in the city of Boston. That's how serious this issue is. I want to say thank you to the makers for bringing this forward. I also want to say thank you to the Greater Boston Labor Council. I know Darlene is here on the call, but I want to say thank you to the Greater Boston Labor Council and their partners as well. They work with a lot of partners throughout the city. special civil rights partners. So want to highlight the incredible work Greater Boston Labor Council, Mass AFL, and our building trades play. I see my friend Jamie McNeil from Local 26. You know, a lot of these non-union hotels that we have in the city are exploiting their workers, and they're not treating them fairly. They're not treating them with respect. They're not treating them with dignity. Many of them are immigrants, but thank God we have a union like Unite 26 that stands up for workers and worker rights. So I just want to say thank you again to the people that are involved in this issue. I apologize for being somewhat late, and I'm going to continue working hard with my colleagues in government on any case about wage theft in the city of Boston.
Thank you, President Flynn. That means that it is now my time to say thank you to all of you, but also one of the things that I love about the labor movement is that the labor movement includes all workers, including folks who are not in unions, even though I highly recommend it and you should try to get in one. But basically, when we're doing this, one of the things that jumped out to me with this, which was lots of help from the Carpenters Union in the language and the way that they specialize it, but the expertise there is obviously with contractors and construction and in that realm. And I think we have an equal problem in hospitality and in our restaurant industries where there aren't, obviously in our union hotels, this is not an issue because they have a union there to advocate for them, but in our non-union hotels it is. And for our restaurants, I think the vast majority of which, if not all, are non-union, it is. One of the things that I would like to do is with this vehicle, with this ordinance, I fully expect the council to approve this. And so the thing I would like to do is extend as many protections to as many people as we can. And one of the things that I've been thinking about, and I know we still have Director Nguyen, so if this is an appropriate question for you, maybe then you can field it. But the question specifically, and I think either Darlene or Jamie, you might be the best ones to answer it, is we know that there's stop work orders and things we can do in construction to penalize folks who do violate wage theft laws and things of that nature. What are the kinds of things we can tie to an ordinance if we wanted to say, put some version of a stop work order for a restaurant or a bar or a hotel that is not doing right by their workers? What are the kinds of mechanisms where they need city approvals or they need the city to allow something to happen where we can say, look, if you have a documented history of this, we're not doing that? What are the sort of stop work order versions of that for that world? And I see that you've unmuted, Jamie, so I'm gonna let you go first on that.
Thank you, Council, and thank you for the question. Thank you, President Flynn, as well, for those kind remarks, and Councilor Lujan. So the main things we're talking about here, it's the licensing board. For our industries, it's 2 particular licenses, an in-holder's license, which I believe the city has fairly wide discretion about who gets to hold an in-holder's license. I don't have the language in front of me, but it's something like, the city may revoke or not re-up a in-holder's license based on bad behavior. It's something along those lines. So it's fairly wide discretion. The other license that we're talking about is a pouring license. And just to speak plainly, I mean, we revoke or put holds on these licenses for fights, right? For crimes that may have been committed at a bar. We saw one across from City Hall over the weekend. We see bad behavior being punished when it comes to, excessive noise, if there's an entertainment license. So all these bad behaviors are routinely punished. I don't see how stealing people's wages doesn't fall under bad behavior as well. So to me, it's pretty standard and it's pretty simple and plain that the licensing board could be enforcing this ordinance as much as it enforces, a loudspeaker or somebody getting into a fight outside the bar. And certainly when it comes to hotels as well, if those licenses are revoked or suspended until the problem is dealt with, the problems will be dealt with almost immediately. It's guaranteed. You can. I'm not a betting person, but I'll bet some money on that. So that would be my suggestion and my recommendation. And like I said, I think there's fairly broad discretion around any preemption issues or any issues like that for the city to actually wield its power that it currently has and just apply this to that behavior.
And I think I fully agree with that. I think that's what I would like to see us do in the working sessions, is create language that brings in those sort of industries in that way, because the reality is people in these industries, when they're stealing wages and they're doing that, they do that because they know that these workers generally don't have an outlet to go to. And so if we have a way for that to happen, frankly, I think in the example that you used, when there are fights at a bar or at a club or at a restaurant, or there's some kind of incident, they are escalators. Like if it's an ongoing issue, we tend to take that into account on following subsequent offenses. And so I think there is a way to wrap this into that, because stealing wages is as much a crime as allowing somebody to leave your business overly intoxicated or to have a fight in your business. In fact, in my opinion, wage theft is almost you're more responsible for that in many ways than if there's a fight that happens in the front of your building. There, you have much more control over whether or not you are stealing somebody's wages. And so those are the kinds of things that I think we should be trying to rope in, and I'll be trying to expand this out to. And so in the working sessions, just a heads up for everybody that I think that's what you've hit on is kind of what I was thinking. I don't know if there's another avenue that I wouldn't know about. I'm open to hearing about those, because as many avenues as we have to rein that in, I'd love to do. It's hard enough out here for working folks without having their salaries and their wages stolen or their tips stolen. And so I see that you are muted, Darlene, so I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
Yeah, I did. Thank you, Counselor. I did want to just add that I will, before these working sessions, try to have conversations with as many of our unions that are impacted directly in other worker centers. In particular, for example, I know we didn't bring this, I brought up property services, in particular the janitorial industry. That is a very rampant wage theft with a contracted and subcontracted model as well. Just one example I just want to share very quickly. We essentially did a stop work order by default when La Colaborativa, Gladys Vega, and the worker center there partnered with all of us, our unions, to shut down the AMC Lowe's by having an action there. If you guys remember this was one of our very first wage theft actions. 150 people crowded into that theater because they were not paying their 6 janitors who were cleaning the theaters, and the AG had repeatedly cited them fines, and they had not paid them. Within 24 hours, there was a check on Gladys's door after that action. And essentially just an example that what Jamie said is that when they do, stop work orders are important. We essentially stop their work for a couple hours, and within 24 hours, their wages were paid. So.
Yeah, no, I think that's incredibly important. I would also just add probably security as well, right? Because we have security that are contracted and subcontracted by these buildings that are probably also subject to the same kinds of problems. And so I appreciate that, Darlene, that you will reach out to them and do that. At this time, I want to give counselors, before we go to public comment, a chance to do a closing. I know obviously counselors will stay for the public comment, but I don't know if the unions that are currently represented here now will stay for public comment. So I want to give folks a chance to say their final comments and whatever they would like to say. So I'm going to start with Councilor Mejia.
Yeah. Thank you, Councilor Arroyo, for chairing this, and also for always being my co-sponsor on all things that are going to cause mass disruption because that's what these times require. And just really grateful for the panelists and not just your thought leadership, but really being super mindful of some of the unintended consequences that some of these things can have if we're not doing our due diligence and making sure that we are every single little loophole that potentially other folks may want to use, that we put a stop to it. So thank you to the advocates. And yes, I would agree with Jamie in regards to Trin. I mean, like, I love how you show up. Trin, I'm not sure if you're still here, but I just love the way you always show up in these hearings. You recognize that, yes, you work for the city, but your job and how you are so committed to the labor workforce is just so incredibly refreshing, because oftentimes we show up in these spaces and we get a lot of lip service. And I think with you, every space that we've been in terms of hearings, you always just speak in plain language, right? Things that we can understand. And more importantly, that those who are tuning in understand your commitment. So, you know, we are just deeply appreciative of you and how you always show up. And to our labor partners, thank you. Thank you for your deep partnership. We can only do this if we're all working and rowing in the same boat and not poking holes so that we can all drown. So really do appreciate your partnership, and just a special shout out to the carpenters for working alongside our offices to bring this to the attention of our colleagues. And as Councilor Arroyo said, we are committed to expediting this and moving it, and I'm confident that our colleagues are all on board, and we'll be able to pass this ordinance. And more importantly, to Trin's point, making sure that we are building the infrastructure and the financial support that you need to be able to execute against these deliverables. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Mahan, and thank you as well for your partnership on this. I don't know if Councilor Louis Jen has any closing statements she would like to make. No.
Well, basically just want to just say thank you to Trin. We haven't met yet, but I have seen you today and at the panel that we had the other day regarding Power Core, and I'm excited to work together and with all the energy and truth that you bring to the position, and obviously to all of our partners in labor for the work you're doing. I'm excited, you know, to think about how this is, you know, getting this passed, thanks to the chair, of course, and the sponsors here, but also to see how we operationalize it in a way that maximizes the impact on the people we're trying to protect. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilor Louis Jen, and Council President Ned Flynn, if you have anything you'd like to add.
Thank you, Councilor Arroyo. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and just want to echo my colleagues also to Trin for the incredible work that you've done over the many years. So it's always a pleasure working with you, Trin, and with your team as well. Just want to also say, as I mentioned, the role of organized labor in this debate, but what I respect about organized labor especially is the advocacy of all workers, regardless if they're in a union or not in a union. There was an issue at the Four Seasons. I worked with my city council colleagues in Local 26. They're not union workers, but they didn't get a fair severance. In the union, that the organization that really worked with us, representing and advocating for the workers, was Local 26. Again, that hotel is those workers were non-union, but Local 26 believed that a threat to any worker, regardless if they're union workers or not, is a threat to everybody. So they went to bat for them. They're also going bat the Greater Boston Labor Council, the Carpenters Union, and so many others for the workers at the Marriott Copley Hotel, making sure that they're advocating for those workers because they're not being treated with respect or dignity. So that's what I like about organized labor, is they stand up for workers, and that's what this body does also. We fight for workers when they're being exploited, but there should be very little avenue or opportunity in the city for a construction company or a restaurant that takes advantage of any worker. I worked with the Chinese Progressive Association on a bad actor that was exploiting workers at a restaurant in Cambridge. And, CPA went to bat, and I supported them in Cambridge, who was an immigrant worker. But I also want to thank not only organized labor, but a lot of these civil rights and community partners that do tremendous work in our city, such as the Chinese Progressive Association. So having said that, I'm on board. I also want to recognize all the calls I received from various supporters of working men and women across Boston. I won't name them, but I'm glad they weighed in on this debate. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And we have other unions that are waiting to do public testimony. So we're going to go to our public testimony. But I also want to just thank our panel and thank Director Nguyen for staying throughout this whole thing. We have several folks for public testimony I'd like to bring into the room now so that they can actually speak. We have, and I'm just going to name the names so that Kerry or whoever in Central Staff, and by the way, thank you to Central Staff for all you do to make these things possible. But we have Pablo Ruiz from 32BJ SEIU, and we're trying to figure out what name Mr. Ruiz might be under. Al Vega from MassCosh, John Cusack, not the actor I'm presuming, and Joe O'Brien from the Carpenters Union. And so if we can just let the public comment folks in, and we can start with Al Vega. You're muted, Al Vega. And I see Councilor Flaherty has shown up and has his hand up. If you're okay with me going to you after public testimony, Mike.
Yes. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just I was hosting the Boston Year 13, so my apologies for joining late, but I'm well aware of the issue. Been working obviously with you as the chair and Council President Flynn and our friends in the trade. So it's a real issue, and I'm just here to add my name and voice to the chorus, and anything I can do to be helpful to put an end to the wage theft. Count me in.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. And so normally I tell folks who are here for public comment, they have 2 minutes, but I'm going to give you all a little bit more time than that because we have a set number, and so it should be fine. So Mr. Vega, if we could start with you.
Great. Thank you so much, Councilor Arroyo. Councilor Arroyo, Councilor Mejia, and members of the Boston City Council Committee on Government Operations, thank you again for this opportunity to testify today. My name is Al Vega. I'm the Director of Policy and Programs at MassCosh, the Massachusetts Coalition for Occupational Safety and Health. We are a 46-year-old workers' safety and health rights nonprofit whose mission is to ensure that all workers can earn a fair wage, be treated with dignity and respect, and be able to go home to their families alive and well and free of workplace injury and illness. MassCosh is pleased about and supportive of this council's efforts in undertaking steps to update and expand the city's 2014 executive order establishing requirements for city contracts in an effort to prevent wage theft. Every week, employers fail to pay for the labor of the workers who are members of our Immigrant Worker Center and for the labor of their colleagues, neighbors, and other family members, many who are often working for less than a living wage to begin with. This takes a big toll on those families. Workers end up going for long periods without pay, and they and the people who depend on them experience sleep deprivation and acute stress while they try to figure out who to turn to recover the wages they are owed. Workers seeking assistance and fighting for these wages turn to our Worker Center organizers. For example, working with one of our legal partners, Justice at Work, MassCosh has provided advice, sought representation, or played a role in the referrals of wage theft claims for 401 workers since 2011, obtaining $1.52 million on their behalf. But this, again, only represents a small fraction of the workers who have had their wages stolen year after year. While we strongly believe more needs to be done to protect workers from wage theft, we again just want to reiterate some of those language concerns that have been mentioned already today that are in this proposal. That could, again, potentially have those unintended and unforeseen impacts on some of our city's immigrant working communities, as well as those from municipalities within Greater Boston. These concerns are included in more detailed and written comments that our partners at GBLS have made available to this committee and were mentioned by GBLS as many of those local Worker Center partners and advocates who also want to express those concerns. In this regard, we hope that the council will draw from recent policy and practice statements from a number of federal agencies. Again, DHS, DOL, and the NLRB have been emphasizing the importance of ensuring that these worker protections provided by law can be accessed and asserted by all workers, regardless of immigration status and without any fear of retaliation. We are hopeful that whatever language is ultimately approved by this council, that immigrant workers know they will not be used as scapegoats by unscrupulous employers or retaliated or discriminated against for being systemically oppressed and limited by current immigration and employment law that perpetuates the wage theft cycle we have all referenced today. Mascosh would also like to speak in support of the safety concerns and history section of the proposed ordinance. This section is almost identical to current language found in section 16A 1.2, safety concerns and history, and 5.30, conditions and license of permits of the City of Boston Municipal Code. This language was added to the municipal code after the tragic death of Kelvin Chuck Maddox and Robert Higgins in a trench incident in the South End in 2016. The OSHA investigation of the incident revealed that the company Atlantic Drain was considered by OSHA to be a severe violator. And working with Mascosh, OSHA, and the Metro Boston Building Trades Council, among many others, the city developed this language to ensure that it had a mechanism to prevent companies with a record of unsafe working conditions from receiving permits in our city. This crucial safety and health language should be recognized as it's currently in effect, but it also shouldn't be buried at the end of a long ordinance almost entirely focused on wage theft. If it is going to remain in some version of the ordinance, its significance ought to be recognized in the title or heading of the ordinance, something maybe like an ordinance to prevent wage theft and unsafe work in the City of Boston projects. Mascosh looks forward to working with Councilor Arroyo, Councilor Mejia, and other members of this committee, as well as our labor allies, to ensure that this ordinance provides all workers the workplace protections that they need and deserve. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Vega. And changing the heading is actually something we can do, changing the name of the ordinance. And frankly, the events of last week, I think, highlight again, because that is not the first event in the 3 years that I've been on the council that highlight the dangerousness and the worker safety requirements. So that is something we can certainly look at in the working sessions. And I thank you for bringing that here today. Mr. Joe O'Brien, the floor is yours. And if you can just state your name, affiliation, and then go right into your testimony.
Thank you so much, Councilor. My name is Joe O'Brien. I'm the Political and Legislative Director for the North Atlantic States Regional Council of Carpenters. We represent 30,000 carpenters across 7 states. And as mentioned by Chris Soros, we also proudly stand with our brothers and sisters in the construction industry, whether union or non-union, to fight for their rights every day. We want to thank Councilor Arroyo and Councilor Mejia for their leadership putting this forward, as well as our friends on this call, members of the council, especially Councilor Ruthie and Councilor Flynn and other members of the committee, as well as all the councilors who are working hard to fight for workers here in the city of Boston. Wage theft, tax fraud, and misclassification of workers is an epidemic across our country. And I want to speak just for a couple minutes how this impacts our industry, how it impacts responsible contractors, workers, and taxpayers. First of all, our construction industry has been devastated by wage theft, tax fraud, and misclassification of workers. As many of you know, the construction industry historically provided opportunities for folks with less education to enter the middle class. Sadly, over the last number of decades, that has been eroded by many of these practices. A recent study by the University of California in Berkeley actually found that 4 in 10 construction workers today have to rely on some type of public assistance to get through their monthly life. And it's a real epidemic that has driven down wages and made life hard for our industry and closed a lot of opportunities for people across our country. Second, the impact that this wage theft, misclassification, and has on our responsible contractors. Sadly, today, hundreds of contractors across the Commonwealth and thousands across the country engage in wage theft and misclassification and take advantage of workers. They do this, it was mentioned by Chris Soros, because it provides an economic advantage and is a penalty on responsible contractors. It's estimated today that responsible contractors who play by the rules, paying payroll taxes, unemployment, participating in workmen's compensation system have to pay now 30% more than those that don't, putting them at a real disadvantage in the marketplace. The third area that these issues affect are workers and workers across the Commonwealth and the country, workers who lose opportunities, as we've heard previously on the call, for pay, for overtime, for access to workmen's compensation if they're injured, or access to the unemployment system if they are unfortunately lose their job. And as we've heard, sometimes workers are not paid at all. And then last, wage theft and misclassification of workers actually hurts taxpayers. Our study done by UMass Amherst found that here in Massachusetts, in the residential contractor sector alone, there's more than $100 million of lost revenue in tax payments to the Commonwealth, to payments into the unemployment fund, payments into the workmen's compensation system, more than $100 million just in that one sector, the residential construction sector. And the authors of that study think it's a very low estimate. As mentioned, there are some real actions that the city has already done good work in this under the leadership of the council and the previous mayor. And we think this ordinance can be stronger. It's been mentioned by a number of speakers. There are good examples of local wage theft ordinances passed in Somerville, Lynn, and in other cities around New England, like Providence and Portland. Real quickly on summary, the key elements to help strengthen the construction sector. Number one, this ability to pull back or to temporarily suspend building permits, which will really send a significant messaging to irresponsible contractors. Second, clawing back of tax benefits and public benefits. And the last piece is mentioned by Chris. We think it's really important to go even further, use this crisis as an opportunity to further expand opportunities for people in Boston by expanding opportunities through apprenticeship. So I want to thank you once again, Councilor Royal, for your leadership, and Councilor Mejia and all the members of the council that are on this call and that have been working on this issue with us. We're grateful for your leadership, and we look forward to working with you to actually make a strong, powerful ordinance that begins to address this challenge. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. And I'm going to go to, it looks like our last public comment here is John Cusack.
Good afternoon. Yeah, just afternoon. I was going to echo some of the opening statements from the people who brought this forward. Councilor Mejia stated it so plainly. It was wonderful. This is financial abuse. Councilor Arroyo brought up a point that was repeated by Mr. Vega from Mascosh. People whose business plan is based on not paying people are not inclined to prioritize worker safety. It's not something that's even in the top five. I want to echo Darlene and Jamie. This is about the values that we have in the city of Boston, and seeing to it that there is a political will, and today is shown so clearly what the political will is. And to Jamie's point, there are things in place, and if you bring attention to the problem, if the problem's dealt with, the problem will go away. I want to thank everyone involved for everything they put into this. To echo Councilor Block's opening statement, this is a local opportunity to help correct, basically a violation of the U.S. Constitution. I understand the state has oversight, the federal government has oversight, but the chance to live in a city to I think it was Darlene's point, to make this a gold standard is something I'm so happy to see us moving forward with. One point I do want to make, then I'll hopefully be under 2 minutes. The apprenticeship components and the BRJP. I'm a lifelong Boston resident. BRJP and the opportunity to have an apprenticeship where I was trained in the skills I have today, it altered my life. It altered the trajectory of my life. It altered the trajectory of my children's lives. And as a first generation American, it altered my parents' lives. It changed my parents' lives for the better. It's an incredibly important component paired with the BRJP. By the grace of God, I'm in a position now where I can help men and women in the city of Boston enjoy what I've enjoyed. So with that, Again, I want to thank everyone for all their work. I want to thank Councilor Flaherty, Councilor Chen, and Councilor Flynn for coming on. Again, thanks again.
Thank you. And I'm glad that you are in the position you're in today. I'm grateful for everybody who gave public testimony. And I do believe that is it. I'm just going to make sure nobody gets left behind. Nope, everybody is good. So I just want to say thank you to the counselors who have stayed on. Councilor Mejia, Councilor Lee Jen are both still here. Thank you to Director Nguyen. Thank you to Council President Flynn as well. Thank you to Director Nguyen, and thank you to all of our panelists, David McNeil from Local 26, Darlene Lombos from the Greater Boston Labor Council, and Christopher Soros from the Carpenters. And so thank you, everybody, for your additions. We're going to attempt to get working sessions in this month on this ordinance so that we can start to push this through. And there's going to be some language changes. I think most of the things that have been offered in this hearing have been very helpful. I think the idea here for everybody is to maximize benefit for workers and minimize any collateral harm that any language could cause that I don't think is intended. And so when we're in the working sessions, I think we can tailor this and tighten this up because I think everybody shares the same exact goals, which is to ensure that we're creating the strongest possible worker wage theft and safety protections possible in this ordinance that we are able to do. And so I thank everybody for your years of advocacy on this and for getting us in a position today where we can get this through. So thank you to all of you for your time. I'm going to let you all go now at 12:10. And thank you to the folks who stuck through to give public comment. I appreciate all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Council.
And thank you, Carrie.
Bye.
Thank you much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.